This is the second week that I am without Doc Rock. So as I've said last week, anything is possible. Anything is possible here in the Amesbury studio. We're having fun. We're in the holiday season. I have my giant martini glass filled with chocolate. So things are going to get wild up in here. And I'm really, really excited to be hanging out here today, whether you are listening later or hanging out with us in our live studio audience like Parker is. Parker is always first. Actually, today, Parker, you were number... I don't even see it. Maybe you're first, but it's not showing up in the comments. I'm going to consider you first today. But we see Earl's hanging out, Paul's hanging out. The whole crew is here. Whether you are here in the live studio audience or you are listening later, this is our end of year Q&A episode. And because I know that there are some of you out there watching or listening who have questions but haven't had the courage to ask them yet, I have a special update for you. Guest here today. I tricked my childhood favorite person, closest friend in the world, who has never podcasted or live streamed before, to join me today from her home in Montreal to ask all of the dumb questions for you. So she's been tasked with thinking of every possible question in the world of podcasting. She's going to ask them. We're going to take questions from the live crew, and we're just going to talk generally all about podcasting because this is the last episode of the year. We are taking a break next week. Doc is still out. I have holiday things going on, and then we'll be back again first thing in January. So once again, I just can't thank you all enough for being on this journey with us. It has been six months. We launched right at the beginning of August. We've made it to the end of the year. Episode 21. We have not given up or lost ourselves to pod fade yet. So it's just been really awesome. And I'm just so grateful for each and every one of you for being on this journey with us. Without further ado, let's bring on the crew. Luis and Natalie are here. It's so fun to have a producer who can push all the buttons. Oh, thanks so much for hanging out with me today. Thanks for being here, Nat. Thanks for being here, Luis.
My pleasure.
It's fun to be here.
Yeah, I know. We were joking before the show started. This can be our first question as we warm up all of our podcasting questions. Who here, let us know in the comments so we can feel love. But we were talking all about Die Hard. We are Die Hard fans. We are Die Hard fans of Die Hard being a Christmas movie. Yes. So don't fight us here in the comments. but it is our annual tradition at the Fawkes household to video call in Natalie and to watch Die Hard on Christmas Eve while wrapping gifts. So that is on the horizon coming up here in a couple of days and should be
not Christmas until Hans Gruber falls off the tower.
He's got to fall off that tower. I know. And Luis was saying that Todd, who maybe is watching today, from Christmas Clatter, was having this discussion. So once this episode wraps, we'll have to jump over there and grab that episode to take a listen to. It's just been such a crazy podcasting journey over the last 6 months. So I guess I'll kick off as Natalie thinks of questions. And Paul reminds everyone that it's not a question unless you have that cue in front of it. And it is a Christmas movie.
Yes.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you for backing us up.
Thank you. Thank you for backing us up. Yeah, I'm sure we'll have people arguing on the other side. But yeah, I will say if you're newer to joining us on this show, it's been really awesome kind of figuring out, what starting a podcast is in 2022, what the potential of podcasting is, and how video works together. I love all these diehard responses. Mm-hmm. But yeah, it's been an interesting journey. And I think when we first started off, the concept was like, we're going to do a video podcast. We're going to do it about video podcasting and about workflows. But it's just been really neat seeing how effective live streaming is alongside podcasting. So if you're like an audio only podcast person, you don't have to do our format to be adding in video. You could add in, events, live events or, special fun video moments and still be able to incorporate video in. But yeah, it's been a fun journey. And then we forced Luis to be our podcast producer, and that saved us a whole bunch of time.
So I love that. I love the fact that you say that you forced me to do something that I have so much fun doing. I found this like to be a what is it, like a step up in the ladder, so to speak. It was kind of like a promotion. That's the word, right? Like instead of saying like that, I saw it as a promotion because I first started here with the flow as just being the editor, right? And editing these podcasts, the most difficult thing was actually waiting for the files to get uploaded with all of our busy schedules.
Yeah.
And it was while we were in Massachusetts and we were trying to figure out how to produce this podcast while we were producing a live event, which was the Leap into Podcast. So we were trying to figure and fit all of this stuff in at the same time. And it just like hit us that one of the key features of Ecamm is that we can actually remote produce, which is what I've been doing since that point. And that totally took all of like the configuration, the headaches away from Doc and Katie. And that just literally made it the flow. Like, I think that's when we hit our flow.
That's when we hit our flow.
Right.
Yeah.
And we just started getting things done correctly because of the fact that, you know, I was able to take on that role. And it was just kind of like one of these like moments. You know what I'm saying? Like, we were like, we should have been doing this from the get-go. But starting as an editor, I only saw it as the editing aspect. And then now to produce it, I am able to have all the recorded files as soon as we're done with the live stream. So I no longer have to put like the burden or even wait for Doc and Katie to upload the files. I already have them, so I can get to work as soon as we're done.
Yeah, it makes a really big difference. So, you know, for those who don't know what our flow or our process is, and for Natalie who's learning, who's live learning,
I'm like,
this,
I have questions. I understand the words, but I don't understand how they work together.
Awesome. All right. So here is the flow of this podcast. So we go live to YouTube every Tuesday at noon. That's what we're doing right now in front of what now we affectionately call our live studio audience, which makes me feel very like Ellen. I'm like, hi, I'm Ellen in front of our live studio audience. And we go through the topic for that day. And we usually do, you know, hey, usually when Doc's here, he's much better at intros and outros than I am. So we do, you know, our housekeeping, hanging out with all of our live viewers, and then we stop and we do kind of like a deep breath and a countdown, and then we're in recording mode and we're really focused on the content and the guests that we have on. And then at the end, we open it up to Q&A only for our live studio audience. And as Luis was saying, we had, you know, when we first started off, we had this, you know, Doc was producing the show. So he was the one who was actually streaming out using Ecamm to YouTube. And then at the end of it, you know, he'd have all of the files and then I'd have the files I was recording on my end. And we'd do this like mad, you know, trying to remember before the next thing hit to upload those and say like, here are these files, Luis, and here are these files, Luis. And then Luis would take those files and edit them all into our audio only podcast and then into like the final produced video podcast, which goes back up onto YouTube. So having Luis drive the show and be able to, you know, push all the buttons just means that then it's recording that directly onto his computer instead of all of our computers. And so it saved a ton of time because we only have a week window. So when we go live the following Tuesday, so today, last week's episode of The Flow dropped onto, you know, Spotify and Apple Podcasts and all of the different audio only. So all of our live audience people who are amazing and who are here get to ask all their questions live. So they get to, you know, be early and they get the content before anyone else, which is awesome. So that is our general structure. And then that allows us a week for Luis to dive deep and do all of the editing and the audio cleanup and everything that he needs to do. And for us to grab the transcript and, you know, put together the closed captions and show notes and promotion, you know, some shorter video clips and promotions. But it's really become this like very seamless process now because we each have things that we're doing. You know, Doc, even though he's in Japan, has still been pushing the podcast out to all of the audio only platforms through our partners at Captivate. I'm still doing all the transcripts. Luis is still editing all the show. So it comes together.
Here's another thing. Like, Katie, did you remember to hit record?
I did.
on
I did.
Ecamm.
I did. I've gotten so good at that
Okay, because you
because
see, because I forgot to mention it today because we were having such a cool like behind the scenes
Mm-hmm.
conversation that I totally forgot to mention it. But that's another thing. Like one of the key benefits of me being able to produce it was that I feel that the conversation between you and Doc really elevated because you guys didn't have to think about all the technical stuff and could just
Mhm.
literally have a conversation.
Yeah.
And then if there were times that either one of you would forget to record on your end and I needed those files no longer existed. And then I would have to download the file from YouTube that we just uploaded so I can get like the audio, which wasn't the best. So as soon as I started producing and I had the video, the audio files and everything here, it really did streamline everything.
Yeah.
So when say Katie or Doc forgot to hit record and you had to download it from YouTube, did that change the quality of the end product?
Absolutely. Because
Okay.
the quality that you're recording directly into your computer is the highest quality. Everything
Yeah.
else that,
Yeah.
is being transmitted or downloaded is going to be compressed in one way or another to make that transfer, as smooth as possible. But
Mhm.
that's what degrades the quality of the video feed. So that's another scenario where Doc forgot to turn on another program that we use, one of our sponsors, Speedify, and
Mhm.
what actually happened was that Ecamm prioritizes the audio, so that was good, but the video feed really started coming in and breaking apart. So the fact that he was able to record a high quality audio and video feed directly to his computer, I was able to then grab that file from him and use that as the upload that really cleaned up everything. And that's why we do the edits. So here in
Yeah.
the flow, we hit the podcast in all three ways. Like we're
Yeah,
doing the live right
we push all
now,
the buttons.
and then we go and we clean it up to make it an audio only podcast. And then on top of that, we add the same audio podcast with the video cleaned up on top of it as a second video podcast onto YouTube as well.
Yeah.
Okay. So I have like a very newbie podcast question.
Love
Yeah.
it.
No, this
Let's
is
go.
great. This is why. Yeah. All the questions today.
What's the advantage of having a video podcast, an audio podcast,
Mm.
and or both?
Okay, I will start with and or both, right? Because it's gonna cover
Well,
it.
that's where we're at, so that's a good place to
Exactly.
start.
The
Yeah.
One of the things that I really enjoy is the fact that I feel that the conversation really gets elevated when you're able to see someone's expression, because even though I'm talking right now, you guys are nodding and agreeing with me, giving me that reassurance of what I'm speaking, which is what happens in a natural conversation. When you're doing an audio only podcast, it's more like a phone call, which even though you can get, like kind of passionate about it, you end up stepping over each other's voices because you really don't have that affirmation or really understand, or maybe even sometimes come with that, are you still there? Because
Yeah.
you hear nothing from that end.
Yeah.
That's one of the key things. But then when you're dealing with the actual video side, is that it helps when you put it on the correct platform like YouTube that we do, because
Mhm.
YouTube is an SEO or search engine optimizing machine.
Yeah.
So the flow, the hashtags, all of the text that Katie's talking about, the SRT files and all the buttons that we press here, all that really helps to get the flow name out into the search engines, being Google, so that you can find it.
Mhm.
But then when it comes to podcasting itself, the audio file, the number one is Apple Podcast. And
Yeah.
that's why you would still need to go through the traditional forms, because that's where the platform is based. So you would still hope and aspire to get all of the listens on the traditional forms of podcasting. We upload through Captivate, right? I
Okay.
believe.
Yeah. And Captivate basically takes our file and all the information and data that we put into it, and it sends it out to all of the places where
All the
podcasts can be
podcatchers.
listened to. Yeah. So that's
Oh,
Apple,
okay.
that's Spotify, so we only need to send through one, and then they basically optimize the file for each one of those platforms. So they're kind of the central place that sends that podcast out to all of the different places, which makes it really nice because Captivate also holds all of our analytics and our data. And, if we want to go back in and do things like run ads in our podcast or change the information. Maybe, we've had a couple times where it's like we were going to have a guest and like it fell through last minute and we did a completely different topic. So we can go back in and change any of that data, and it just updates in all of those places. So and captures all of the listening data as well. So we can see, where are most of our listeners listening to? Are they listening? Are they downloading it onto their device and then listening to it? Are they just listening to it? All of that information is in Captivate. So it makes it really easy to see like what episodes and topics were the most popular. And
but one thing that the standard podcasting through Captivate and all of the podcatchers really doesn't do is promote, because they're there, and then that's when you have to push your own podcast, and that's how podcasting has been done basically up to this point.
Always, yeah.
But now that it's more commonplace and people understand it, they're able to see like kind of an advertisement for a podcast on YouTube, because that's now something that they're implementing. So you can find a podcast that you like, see the people having the conversation, and even though you cannot sit and watch YouTube all day, because you found them on YouTube, now you're able to go into your podcatcher and find it on whichever podcast or platform that you use, whether it's Spotify, Apple Music, or whatever. You're still going to be there, so that then you get that new listener and you might catch them on the audio only side.
Yeah, you can trade back and forth,
that's actually how I found pretty much every podcast I listen to, which is a very limited amount of true crime podcasts. But
you're in good company here.
Yeah.
But I have found them on, that's exactly how I found them, was on like a YouTube ad. I'm like, ooh, murder, I'm down. Let's listen to that.
And you see,
but I listen to it. I never watch it.
Exactly. Yeah. You don't watch it, you listen to it, but you were able to find it because the system that YouTube really does have into play for putting your content in front of the right viewers is just second to none. So that's where the huge benefit of adding that video podcast aspect comes into play.
Yeah. Okay. Oh, Steven's got a great question here. And just a reminder, we're taking live questions from our live studio audience. So throw a Q colon in front of it. Steven wants to know, is there a step-by-step framework PDF for video podcasts? So we have a few downloads that you can grab at any point. If you go ecamm.tv/flow freebies, all one word, you can grab, we have a video checklist for video podcasting. I believe there's one on like how to choose the best microphone. There's I think 3 or 4 that are in there, and we're always growing that. So that folder is there for you. But I mean, really what we just said. So you're really thinking through, if you really want to be able to reach a big audience, you need to be putting your content where your audience lives, right? So as we just said, like either YouTube is owned by Google. It's the second largest search engine in the world. It's likely at some point it's going to probably even become the biggest search engine in the world as more and more people are, in a video first mentality, in a video first space. So having a video option, even if it's not your weekly podcast, is huge in discoverability. And then, and then getting, finding a really good podcast host, be it Captivate or someone else, to be able to take the audio side of it and get it out to all of those different platforms is hugely important to being able to reach, because everyone has a favorite, right? So like there are some people that are solely team Spotify. There are some people who are like, heck no, only Apple. There are people who are only Amazon Music. There's everything in between.
Google.
See, yeah, there you go. Google, right?
So Google.
Yeah, see? So, and we're there. You can download it to us on Google, right? Because but you need to be thinking that through. And then before we jumped on to today's episode, we were talking behind the scenes about and reminding Natalie that if I was to say, be demoing something, like if your podcast content is maybe you're walking someone through an app. Like if we were to open up Captivate and show you what Captivate looked like, we could do that in video, but then we would have to be thinking through our audio only listeners and really describing what that experience is like, because those people, have us in their ears. They can't see. So, we could be like, look how amazing Captivate is. And like talking through how they'd just be frustrated, and they would likely take us out of their ears and find something else to listen to. So I think really thinking through, if you have a similar workflow to us, we have a number of different audiences that are really important for us to be thinking through as we are recording, as we're live streaming. We have our live viewers, people like Earl and Spazia and Paul Duncan and Stephen. I can see them all in the chat hanging out with us, asking questions. They're here in the now. They want responses. They want us to engage with them and talk with them. Those are our live viewers. We're going to have replay viewers later who find either this video or our produced video, and they weren't here live. So if we are only talking to the live audience and we're not creating any kind of new content, they're just going to be cheesed off. They're like, what? Like, this wasn't fun. I found it's like coming to a party and no one is left at the party, right? So you have to really be thinking through those replay viewers. And then you have to be thinking through your podcast listeners, right? So they don't have the visual, and maybe they don't want to, watch or engage with the podcast in a visual, in a video format. So you need to be thinking, they're driving or cleaning their house or walking their dog, or and they can't see everything that you're talking about. So you have to really be thinking through those different audiences, and the format of your podcast is so important if you're going to go to those different places, and why we do kind of the beginning and end that we do. So this episode is a different kind of thing because we're taking live questions and we're going to say them out loud so everyone can hear them. But usually we keep questions to the very end, and then we just trim that part off so that our replay viewers don't, they miss that, but they don't know. They can join us live the following time. They don't feel as though they're excluded. And our listeners, the same thing. They're just getting the main content that matters, and we're not getting distracted by all of our awesome people. Earl says that he's doing a live stream podcast just like us. That's awesome. And yeah, Captivate, Steven says Captivate has a great framework for audio. Captivate makes it really, really easy.
Is it, and I might be dating myself, but is it kind of like Hootsuite? Is it like a Hootsuite but for podcasts?
That's an interesting way to approach it. Sort of. Yeah.
It's like posting to all your platforms.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's actually a really great way to put it. I might steal that. Steal that and use that going.
You're welcome.
It is. It dumbs down the process for people like me who, don't come from a podcasting or radio or TV background. So it's plug and play. So, it's like, enter your podcast title here, put in the description here, upload the file here. So it's very, very easy. Anyone can do it. And again, as I said, if you make mistakes, you can go back and edit it. So it's not like it's over, you've ruined it once you put it out, which is, I think makes it a lot friendlier. When we were going through and doing it.
I think you mentioned it before. I do know what SEO is because being a kid in the 80s and 90s and the beginning of the internet, we used to do organic SEO all the time.
Yeah.
That was just, making a web page on Angel Fire, or people will have no idea what that means. I apologize. But it's like hashtags. Hashtags used to be behind the scenes instead of on the front, right?
Yeah.
So in Capture, is that where you could put your hashtags so that search engines can grab it?
Yeah.
Okay.
So yeah, Captivate lets you do a whole bunch of different, all of your metadata, right? So anything that's public facing, but also all those behind the scenes categories, and thinking through that, that's part of is certainly on our checklist and something we've talked about in more detail in the past episodes, but thinking through when you're starting a podcast, like obviously you want, a catchy name, a logo, some graphics. You want to kind of build a brand, but also you need to be thinking through like who are your listeners and potential listeners on the other side? What categories do they fit in? So like, if you're a sports podcast, like you're clearly going to want to, be like, okay, we're a sports podcast. We're a sports hockey podcast. We're a sports hockey Montreal podcast because we're awesome. So like you want to collect those. We're biased. You want to collect all those categories, and you want to enter all of that data into a tool like Captivate, so that when they're sending it out, they're making sure your podcast gets into the right categories and spaces on all those platforms, on Apple and Spotify and Amazon and Google and all those places.
But yeah, though, now Earl has another question here that I'm going to bring up. He says, do you guys know how to get your podcast onto the podcast tab of YouTube? Which
This is a great
is
question.
exactly what we're talking about right now, because when it comes to the SEO, YouTube could promote your podcast even if it's just because of a particular subject.
Yep.
So that's how the algorithm works with the YouTube system, where the actual conversation that you're having could be what sends it to a lot of people instead of a particular hashtag.
Mhm.
So the way to get your podcast into the podcast tab of YouTube is to literally name it a podcast and make a podcast. It's really not that much different, because at the moment they don't have a category of saying this is a podcast type video. They only have general categories. So if your podcast is about cars, then it will be an automotive podcast categorized that way. But just the fact that you're saying, hey, welcome to my podcast, and you continue to speak about it and format in that way, YouTube will take care of the rest and classify it that way, just the same way that they classify your video shorts into a separate category or your live streams into a separate category. Their system is so top notch, and that's why we recommend putting it on this platform, because you have that much more, I guess, ability to be discovered.
Yeah, and at the moment, I mean, this could change because YouTube podcast is really new. It's just only in the last few months, but at the moment, like Louise said, see, there you go. YouTube podcast is a new thing. YouTube is trying to compete with with Spotify and with a couple of the other places where those existing podcast networks are starting to add video in. YouTube's like, well, we already own all the video, so we'll just add podcasts in on our side. So it's a little bit of a war that's happening. But because YouTube is such a hugely powerful search engine and has, the best algorithms in the world, you have them at the moment doing all of the work for you. So unlike a Captivate, where you need to put in those tags, put in your description, put in your content, as Luis is saying, you certainly need to still add obviously a title and a relevant description into YouTube as you would with a video, but they're doing all of the rest of the work for you based on the information you put in. So again, yeah, like that's why we do, we in our description for this show are always, we have our description for the specific episode, but then below it, we have a template that we use that says, the Flow is a weekly podcast. You can catch our video podcast on YouTube so that they understand their algorithm and their bots understand like, oh, okay, this is a weekly podcast that's happening on YouTube. We're going to put that over here into our podcast tab. Again, that might change. They may build out an entire subset of YouTube that is podcasting, where you need to apply or fill out specific information or do a checkbox that says, hey, YouTube, this is podcast. But yeah, at the moment, it's just a matter of just saying what you are and, adding hashtags in and adding the relevant information in every single episode that you put so that they know what you are and what you're talking about.
Yeah. Because to give a little context, everyone talks about podcast and the RSS feeds, right? And the RSS really stands for, if correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe it stands for really simple syndication, which is RSS, right? And the simple syndication actually has a lot to do with the way that it's designed. So YouTube is that much more advanced than an RSS feed that they're going to have to kind of downgrade themselves to actually implement it. Yeah. Just if that makes any sense. So we're trying to see or waiting to see how YouTube is going to see or how they're going to implement an older technology into their system, or if they're just going to have to feed their information to the really simple syndication, which is RSS.
Yeah. There's so many great questions, everyone. Thank you so much. It looks like Joe is asking, so the word podcast in the description and use it in the first and last sentence. Yeah, I will warn you, there is a limit. You should always talk like a person and not like a robot. So don't be like, it's the Joe podcast. In this podcast, I'm podcasting about podcast. I love podcast, #podcast, #video pod. Don't overdo it, but always really think through the more, as the more advanced that tools like Google and YouTube get, the more they are trying to mimic actual, human conversation and writing. So you just really want to be as descriptive as possible and put, all relevant information in, and think, don't try to be cutesy with things. So like if you have a really cute podcast name, which is super fun, that's great. But then you're going to want to really, lead with what it is. So it's like we have friends, Natalie and I have friends who just launched a podcast called If These Balls Could Talk, which is a sports podcast.
That's
which
so
is
funny.
Adorable, cute. Shout out to them and their awesome new podcast.
Name.
Right? But so they want to be like really clear probably in their description to say like, If These Balls Could Talk is a sports podcast all about, like blah, blah, blah. And so they can have their title in there, but they do want to make sure that, they're very clear with like what it is, when it is, what's the frequency of it, how can people find you, do they have a website? All of that information goes into your podcast description. Sideways. Exactly. Yeah, the title can go sideways. Maybe it's like just the specific episode titles, and they don't.
Sports, not an anatomy podcast. A sports podcast.
Family-friendly sports podcast.
Oh, that's so good.
Yeah. Great question. Oh, more questions coming. All right, I'm reading through them. So Spatia asks. Tech question. Is there a way to receive 2 interviews from the same place with same on-site computer? I want to interview 2 people at the same time from the same location. This is a great question. It is absolutely doable. Luis probably knows a bit better than me, but yes, it is. You're just going to really need to be careful about audio bleed. Is that the right word, Luis? Like you don't want, if you're all in the same space, but you're kind of coming in from different places, you're either going to want to be like next to each other and using a microphone where you can plug it into a mixer like a Rodecaster Pro or something like that, so that your mics are not going into each other and you're getting like echo and it's probably not the right word. Doc would yell at me.
No,
like,
it's not an echo. You said it right with the bleed. When you get audio bleed, when you're hearing the other person speak, because even though you're trying to make it seem like, I'm in this location or they're in a different location, they're really in the same room, but they're both connecting to you through their own feed.
It's the echoey sound.
Exactly, the echoey
to be
sound.
super technical, it's the echoey sound.
There you go.
So to prevent that, right? I've been using this new program. I mentioned it to Kate about. It's called Crisp Audio, and it actually removes everything. So, for example, my air conditioning has been turning on and off throughout this entire podcast. Yet I know it's not coming through because I'm actually looking at the levels. So that could be a simple, addition to your setup that could probably and most likely eliminate that bleeding effect, even if they're in the same room. But then can you actually do it? Absolutely. So whether you have a complete setup, what I do weekly is produce the live stream and this podcast. So what I do is I have Katie log in from Massachusetts, Doc call in from Hawaii, and then I broadcast it from Miami to the internet, so that's how it's done. And you'd be doing the same exact thing, but just trying to make sure that their audio is clean and that, nobody's walking into each other's shot, right? And that's it.
And Crisp, Stephen posted it here as well, but it's KRISP if you're listening. Is an awesome tool. Amesbury is always, I was joking about this last week, burning down or having emergencies. So inevitably there's like, I'm right in the middle of something important and it's like fire trucks in the background or the coffee maker kicks on and starts like running a cycle in the background. So there's always some kind of background sound. So having Crisp just gives me a level of confidence that none of that is going to end up making extra hours of work for Luis on the other end.
Katie told me about a time where she was there in the office and apparently Ken was walking by with his iPhone playing music, and then the HomePods picked it up and started blasting music while she's on a live conversation. And she's like, where's the music coming from? So, anything could happen.
And I
Well,
couldn't, it was
luckily
one of
you
those.
guys aren't hearing my cats fighting in the background right now because there's some like royal rumble happening in my house.
Yeah.
You guys would
See?
probably be concerned if you could actually hear it. They're fine.
Oh,
They're fine.
I love it. I love it. Let's get, all right. I was scrolling through. Okay. I think we're caught up on questions from our amazing live studio audience. And Paul has been madly dropping in all of our links, which I really appreciate. So if you're listening to the podcast and you're not here in the live studio audience, tools that we've talked about are Captivate, which is our podcast host. They are captivate.fm. They're in, I think, almost all of our show notes, but just in case. You can obviously leave a review for us. We prefer Apple because that's where everyone lives, but you can find that on your Apple podcast. Just see, obviously Natalie hasn't left a review. She's like looking down and really, no, just kidding.
I'll leave it on Google.
Yeah, her reviews up on Google, exactly. All right, and then Crisp, which we just talked about, KRISP.ai is the link there. If you're looking for a tool to help with some of that audio magic. Steven says that he's got 2 crazy dogs barking and a gardener with leaf blowers. I know, every single time. It never ever lets you down. You're like, okay, great. It's all quiet. I've tested everything, feeling really good. And then something happens. Here in this space, we are down the hall, as many of you know, from a nonprofit kids coding school, which is super fun. But if I do streams between like 3 and 6 on a weeknight, inevitably there's a giant walking dog robot, and he's just like boom, 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 flying you through the hallways. So you need to, Crisp is a lifesaver on that front.
Yeah.
On that front. Oh my gosh. All right, Natalie, what other questions do you have?
Okay, so we kind of covered it, but
Deeper dive.
when you want to do a podcast, you have this great idea, or you hope it's a great idea, and how do you go about searching where you can find your audience? Like if you're me and I'm really new to this,
Mm-hmm.
and like we were talking just pre-show that Katie and I keep going on about how we want to do like a 90s movie review podcast.
We sure do.
I think it's a brilliant idea. But I mean, how do I search this? How do I figure out if this is a workable idea, or even if it's not necessarily, how do I find my audience? Like, what can I search? I don't know. I have no idea. What am I doing?
Yeah.
What am I doing at this point?
No idea. What am I doing? This is the best newbie question of all time.
It is.
It is. It's so true. I think so. 2 things. One, in the instance of something like that, where it's us and we're being ridiculous and we're converting our like regular BFF chat on Thursday night to a public forum, we likely care much less about like how big the audience is, right? Like it would be fun, ha ha ha, silly if we were able to actually grow it to a substantial audience and be able to do it on a regular basis. But also like if just 2 other people show up, also fine. Like we would still have fun.
Exciting for me,
right? It would be exciting. So I think in that case, it probably matters a little less. What matters more there is like just getting it for us to just stop talking about it and actually do it. And the more that we are excited and talk about it on Facebook and Instagram and all of our like personal platforms, the more all of people who know us and people who know the people who know us, it spreads out that way of just recommendation and it will get to the right audience. If you're doing it for a business, or you're doing it as a marketing vehicle, or the specific audience matters a lot more, then I would say, and I'm interested to hear what Luis has to say about this, but I would say that just doing a search for other similar podcasts and seeing what their descriptions are and their tags and where they're putting their podcast is a good starting point, not only to find the right audience, but also to just see what they're doing and kind of what your, quote unquote competition is in the space, so that you can kind of find the right positioning. And they may also be the perfect place to ask to be a guest on their show or to interact with them in some way, because most people will find a new podcast through a podcast they love, right? So like thinking about those podcasts that you can be a guest, or you can maybe advertise on their podcast or connect with them or trade off in some ways is a good way to kind of do the first starting points of growing that audience or finding that audience. What do you think, Luis?
I think, first off, you nailed it. I have to agree with like everything that you said because yeah, that's exactly what you need to think about. But one thing that we mention here a lot, and when it comes to starting your podcast, is that you kind of it has to kind of be a passion project, right? It
Yeah.
has to be something that you're willing to do, even if you don't get the hypothetical all the listeners,
Yeah.
because when it comes to podcasting, the numbers for you to be what is considered a successful or a top tier podcast it's nothing compared to what we expect as far as millions and millions of views on YouTube.
Yeah.
Right. So when you start thinking about who your audience is, that is the key question that I think people lose focus on, but should be emphasized in, because
Yeah.
when you have 12 listeners, but they're dedicated listeners and they're what we would call you like your ride or die, right? Like your hardcore fans.
Yeah.
Like if you had 12 people in a bar at a get together, most people will be overwhelmed to be the person speaking in front of 12 whole physical people. Yet, if someone were to put a podcast out and have 12 listeners, when these podcasting platforms are not designed to get your podcast out there, but somehow word of mouth has gotten 12 people to listen to your podcast when you're first starting out, that is actually like incredible, because their systems are not set. And that's why we also recommend to do the video side, because the discoverability on different platforms, whether you're just posting a clip on Instagram Reels, or that you just started the same named TikTok account so that you can put little excerpts and cuts of your actual long form content or podcast out there, is what the discoverability aspect of those platforms are really great at. So that's how you would perceivably look for your audience to expand. But also keep in mind that if you had, it's Roberto Blake. He mentioned this and I always reference it, right? If you had 12 people in a room, 30 people in a room, I really doubt that you would ignore those 30 people and head out to the hallway to say, "Hey, I need more people in this room before I start speaking." Right?
Yeah.
It's
That's a good way
kind
to
of
look
have
at
that
it.
mentality,
Yeah.
right? So once you have that, you have anyone's attention, right? That is the most valuable thing. So, cherish that and then really start building on that, because what you want is more people like the 12 that you first, initially started. And those are going to be the ones that advocate for you to be like,
Yeah.
I've been listening to this podcast for years. You really need to check it out.
Yeah. Yeah. It's
That takes a
so,
lot of
so
pressure
true.
off too.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Because it's like
because
when you think like, okay, I have this great idea, I'm gonna do this. It's gonna work super well. I'm doing it with my best friend, and we can maybe monetize it. And just that, like that maybe, that
Yeah.
future distant maybe, causes so much pressure and makes me be like, do we really need to do this? We don't really have time to do this. Maybe we just won't do it at all. But if you
Yeah.
think about it, okay, like I just want a handful of people to be my friends online. I'm like, oh well, that's super doable.
yeah, like
Yeah. It's
think
so
about it
true.
like an online book club, something that could be
Yeah.
small, right?
Yeah.
But has the ability to expand. It has the potential for anything. But the thing that I always want to emphasize is like the reason why you want to start the podcast is because you're having fun. Is because you love the conversation that you have with Katie talking about the movies. So then you want to share that with everyone else and bring the type of people that are going to enjoy that same type of conversation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I know it's so fun. It's what, and I'm sure, raise your hand listening here in the live audience, or send us an email if you're listening to this later and let us know. But I feel like when you're thinking about podcasting, it's so true, Luis, what you just said, that you're like, okay, you like, even if it's a for fun podcast, you're like, well, if I don't have 1,000 listeners, I failed. It's like, it's over. Yet
You kind of
most
take
podcasts,
the fun right out of it.
yeah. A, you take the fun right out of it. And B, most podcasts do not have that kind of listenership. Like there are podcasts that are incredibly successful that have 100 listeners, that have, 500 listeners. Like even the biggest ones out there, even like the Dax Shepherds of the world or whatever, who are, who have a celebrity platform before they start podcasting. even they don't have millions of listeners. It's all a little smoke and mirrors in the entire situation. So I think many of us go into it saying like, oh yeah, we're used to the YouTube number. So it's like, well, if there's not 500 people that have, clicked through and listened to this at the end, like what a failure. Why am I even doing this? But it's a slow burn. And yeah, like you said, like you could have a really successful monetized podcast with 50 people, with 30 people. Like if they love you and they're willing to, buy your t-shirt or join your membership or, or join your Patreon or whatever it is that you've used to monetize your podcast, you can do that with just a handful of people that love you. You don't need millions of people. And in fact, it's probably not actually real anyway. Someone has convinced you that that's the magic number, and that's not the magic number.
Mm-hmm.
It's true. I have this like social media number in my head that everything has to be 1 million.
Mm-hmm.
Like 1 million viewers, 1 million followers.
Yeah.
And like as somebody who's not into that so much, I'm like, that's crazy.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Like, how do you do that? Like, how is that?
Because the thing
It's
is,
not
to be successful, you don't need 1 million of anything, right?
Yeah.
That's the whole thing.
Yeah.
And an example that I can give, which is not exactly podcasting, but it was a live streaming, that a individual would just go on and start live streaming his passion for cigars. And he'll sit there and just puff away on his cigar and have like a brandy, a cocktail, and just hang out. And he had an average of 2 to 3 viewers. And that's what he would get on his live streams. Happened to be that one of those 3 viewers was like the head honcho of this cigar company. And he had been looking for a new way to advertise and ended up sponsoring this person's live stream. And that one viewer changed his whole dynamic from doing something that he loved to now getting paid for puffing on cigars while he goes live.
Yeah,
That's
see,
so cool.
it is the
Power
passion.
podcasting.
Yeah, there you go. Right. Joe says I'm only into 20s and I did a happy dance. Yeah, absolutely. 20. We have 18 right now watching live. And I think I was looking at our podcast numbers this morning. I think we are just over somewhere between 1,000 and 2,000 total downloads since we started in August. And I'm thrilled with that. We have like slow, sustained growth. Our mission is here to help people to understand, all of the different ways that you can get into podcasting and video creation and live streaming. But what's come out of a ton of it is like, I've now been working at Ecamm for over 3 years. And because of this show, I now get notes all the time of people who are like, oh, we need someone who's an expert on podcasting to come onto our show, or we need, a speaker for our virtual event, or the network has grown because we're here, and there's only 16 to 18 of you watching live right now. But when you think later about, podcasting tips or podcasting advice, you're going to be thinking about Ecamm, you're going to be thinking about Doc and me and Luis, and maybe also Natalie, and you're going to reach out and ask those questions.
I have another
later,
question,
right?
and I know you guys talked about this before, not necessarily today, but equipment. So obviously anybody who's watching live can see this wonderful sun journey I've been having going on my face and my squinting, because I'm in Montreal. It's very winter here right now. It was cloudy and there was a huge snowstorm this morning. So I didn't even think. I'm like, it's cloudy. I have a bit of natural light. We're good. Clearly the sun has come out and we're not good because I have this crazy line. My eyes are like pinpoints because I'm squinting. So what do you guys recommend for like a newbie beginner, not too expensive stuff that we can get? Like, what should I have done instead of sitting in my window for my gorgeous natural light?
Well, to tell you, I think that the one thing that you could have done is actually probably put just like if you had a shade, right? So that it wouldn't be direct harsh light. And if you can soften it, then it probably would have been fine, because even though the sun was, like moving past, it wouldn't have been direct light. And that's it. Just something to kind of like soften it before it hits you directly.
Okay.
But when it comes to this, to better answer it, it would have to be, are you looking at this point? I would have to ask, because is it going to be audio only or video? and audio.
Yeah.
Because if you're only going to do audio, I still recommend using a platform like this for that one-on-one conversation where it's more natural, even if
Yeah.
you decide to not use the video at all. And then I would tell you, you should be looking at audio first, because one of the mottos that I always say is bad audio is unwatchable. So
It's true.
Yeah.
whether you have a 4K signal, if the audio is incomprehensible, then at that moment you're tuning right out. And when it comes to podcasting, you don't have the visual medium as an aspect. So it's audio only. And, you have to be cognizant of people like popping sounds, crackling, things like that, distortion, where you be getting a lot of negative feedback because the audio is bad. So audio first would be what I would tell you when it comes to gear. And I'm just going to mention this as well. You've sounded great this entire time.
See,
And
she's got
Katie made me
the
buy
mini
this
Shure,
mic.
my favorite mini
and
Shure.
that's it. And something that's simple, right? A USB microphone that isolates the signal that you're giving it is good enough for you to start a podcast. So what you have
Yeah.
right now is definitely more than good enough.
Yeah. It's Steven says I'm in Montreal too, so yay for
Hey,
my
Steven.
Montreal vibe. And then start with blinds.
I
The
do
more
have
that
a
you're
reason for that, though. Just a small deviation from our topic. I do have curtains, but my cat likes to sit on this is my work office at home. She likes to sit on my desk and look out the windows, so she just shredded them.
Okay.
So I do need to buy new curtains.
stupid cat problem.
Okay.
It's a
so-
cat issue, not
so-
a curtain issue. Yeah, I
so
would
now
pull the blinds if I had any.
for anyone who's in Natalie's situation, right, that has ripped up blinds or anything like that, then what you would want to do for anything is really think about lighting with your camera, right? And lighting, you did something really good, which was look for the natural light and get to a window, because you assumed that it was just going to be nice and overcast so that you would get a nice even light. But that's what you're looking for, even light. So I would then tell you, if you cannot control the window light, which is really hard, that's why we recommend lights.
Clearly, I'm here today.
That you can, right? And that aspect, all you would do is just get actually like anything that you can get your hands on, and make sure that it's soft, and put it directly in front of you at a 45-degree angle. So, behind the camera, or actually, I'm sorry, you're going to put the camera behind the light source so that it doesn't get it, right? And then have the light source just drape over you softly. Just that would be the primary thing. And if you can get a good soft light source, then you can be set. And here's another pro tip, because not everyone has diffusion. If you have a lamp or a desk lamp or something that you're going to use as that source, what you're trying to avoid is direct light. So just actually point it at the wall against you and hit it full blast, so that the light that you're actually getting is bouncing off of the wall, and that will drastically take the edge off of the harshness of the light.
Okay, as a newbie, that's awesome to know. These are great tips. Taking notes, guys.
Well, the other thing is that it's recorded. So, if you forget, you can just watch the replay.
That's very true. I can listen to it later or view it again later.
Replay is available. Replay is dropping next Tuesday once Luis goes through the file and I go through the audio. Yeah. Oh my goodness. We've done it again. We are nearly at the end of our hour. So if you have not gotten your question answered, that's okay. We will get to it. We will circle back and answer questions that are left on the chat here on YouTube, or you can email us questions, flow@ecamm.com, or you can swing over to our Volley, which is a video-centric app where you can leave video questions. I'm still desperate for people to leave me some video questions so I can feature them on the show. But lots of ways to touch base with questions later. But I did see one come up from Caleb. Caleb asked, do you find it to be a big difference, plays versus downloads? This is a really great question. And I don't have like a solid answer on it yet because I'm still in 6-month test mode. I feel like for the first year, at least, I'm going to claim that I am learning actively and not an expert or a genius on this. But it does appear as though, and I know this even from my own podcasting experience, I almost never download an episode. I will subscribe to podcasts I like, so I get reminders, obviously, and I leave reviews because I know how much that matters to podcasters. But I only ever download a podcast if I, I'm going to do like a road trip, or or if I'm in an area where I might not have cell coverage or Wi-Fi ability, or or I just want to make sure that I get all the way through an episode. But I don't hardly ever download. And so I kind of take downloads with a bit of a grain of salt. Like I feel like the download number plus 10%, 20%, some percentage is what the actual listenership is, because you do have a lot of people who are not going to download. That's not they may not even subscribe. They might just be, listening before they make final decisions, or maybe that's just not the way that they function. But
And then I have a question for you, Katie, because I don't actually see the Captivate numbers.
Oh,
So
we
that's
should. I know. I was thinking.
That's why I left it for you.
No. Do you want to? This is putting you on the spot, Luis. But I can open Captivate and we can share my screen and I can go through with everyone to see our Captivate numbers. We'd have to talk it through for our listeners, but I'm happy to show them.
The question that I had was not so much getting into the detail, but just, is there an option there that shows you the difference between downloads and listens?
I can't remember. I'm gonna open it now. I'm opening
because
it now. So I'm looking down.
The reason why I think, and I'm just assuming, but the reason why I think Caleb mentioned that is because some podcatchers or some pod players, right? If you're subscribed to a particular podcast, they will automatically download your episode once it's available, so that it's already there to be listened to offline when they decide to go, because not everyone is usually like maybe within a Wi-Fi network or listens to them in that manner. Like they put it on, I don't even know, some other device while they cut the lawn or something like that.
Yeah. So I'm looking now, and Captivate says in the analytics section, there is a summary, and we have a category called unique listeners. It says a unique listener is someone who is from the same IP address and the same device within the presented time frame. This is a way of estimating the number of people downloading your show based on the IAB version 2 guidelines, which I'll have to look up, so I don't know what that means. And then there is and then there is a downloads overview, which shows me the amount of downloads, and then there's a downloads averages. So they do seem to have a difference between listeners and downloads, but they look. I'm looking at the numbers, and they look like they are the same. So I wonder if I think it still all is based on downloads. So my guess there is that these numbers are higher than what they appear, because I do think that a lot of people are not necessarily, and then also obviously the YouTube numbers are not reflected in our Captivate account. So we'd have to go into YouTube, and YouTube is going to show us, how many people viewed each, whether it's the live or the replay. We have how many live viewers, and then we also have drop off, right? Because when you're on YouTube, most people get distracted halfway through or are not going to stay all the way through. So YouTube will also give us that data on, how many people actually watch the entire episode. Or if they're like me, they watch they start on video and then they're like, oh shoot, I've got to go get the kids. And then it goes on to like the YouTube player on my phone, and I'm listening, and then it comes back to video at the end. So I do both.
And here's another tip for anyone who's looking to start doing this themselves, is that you have to put into account the way that you watch or the way that you listen to your own content, and recognize that that's how other people do it the same way. So for example, like you said it perfectly, like you could start watching something and end up listening to the other half because of the way that you have availability for it. And some podcasts, for me, I can't listen to them all the time, so the downloading feature is there, and then I binge listen to like 2 or 3 episodes because now I have the time to listen to podcasts. So understand that everything happens. And the last thing that most people really do forget is that a lot of people or the majority of people are either watching or listening to this podcast or this content that you're creating on their phones,
Yeah.
right? And
Yeah.
in the middle of a podcast or a video, you'll get a phone call, you'll get a text message, you'll get a this,
Yeah.
you'll get a that, and it'll totally kick that person right out of the viewing experience and open up a completely different app. And that's exactly where the drop off happens. And
Yeah.
people are wondering, why is it so sporadic? It was like, because it has to do with the audience's life, not your particular content. So
I
Yeah.
do listen
little
to
FYI.
everything on my phone. All
Yeah.
videos, like I'm most of the time. It goes around with me, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah, it's
that
on like
makes
a shit.
sense.
Ooh, this just in. Paul Duncan says that IAB is the Interactive Advertising Bureau. So look at that. See, this is
Nice.
the benefit of live streaming, is that you have amazing people like Paul who are just
Thanks,
like
Paul.
hardworking in the chat, answering all of the questions, being super moderators about everything. And Paul also blocked. I did see we had some we have made it. We've had some trolls here and some spam coming in, and Paul was just like, done, off. We got that. I love it. Always listening while multitasking. I absolutely love it.
Yep,
Well,
very true, Caleb. Very true.
we are at the end. We don't want to take up too much of everyone's time because I know it's the holiday season and everyone's closing everything down. Natalie's got to get back to her thing, everything. But I'm feeling more inspired, Nat. I think starting January, we might finally be able to
Maybe we'll do it, guys.
talk about 90s and early 2000s movies and have epic conversations and debates. I'm definitely going to go listen to Todd's breakdown of Die Hard.
Same.
Yeah, that'll
Same.
maybe help us get really inspired. But thank you so much
Thanks for helping me, guys, with my
Yeah.
goofy questions.
Yeah, thank you for being on. I think it's always good. I feel like sometimes we all are like, oh, I don't want to ask that because people will think that then I didn't do my research. Or so it's good to have a plant to ask all of the questions. Oh my goodness. I love it. All right, here we are on the outro that I always screw up, but Luis is helping me go through. So if you love this content, please grab the audio only podcast. You can find us at flow.ecamm.com. That's ECAMM.com. And you can listen to us wherever you want. So whether that's Google like Nat, or you're in the Apple like me, or Spotify if you're crazy. No, just kidding. You can find us anywhere that podcast getting is got, as Doc would say. We also have a Volley, which I keep pushing everyone over to. Give me a reason to go hang out in the Volley. Volley allows you to leave video questions. It's asynchronous, so they're little recorded short form video questions you can record with your phone, and then we can feature them here, which would be super fun. And then final shout out to our incredible, amazing friends at Speedify, who keep us powered when Amesbury is like, forget it, I'm turning off the internet. Speedify keeps the internet going. If you are the kind of person that is doing traveling, or you're out on the go, or you're in a bad internet area and you're trying to do this podcast thing, please, please, please swing over to speedify.com. They are a godsend in keeping it affordable. They are also a VPN. So if you are in Canada, like I am often and overdue to get back there, you can still watch all your American shows in Canada or all your Canadian shows in the States. So you can use the VPN to check that out, but you can find them at speedify.com. We did it. We did another episode of The Flow. There was no doc and we still made it through. Luis, thank you so much for helping out. Nat, thanks so much for hanging out.
It was so much fun.
Bye, guys. Happy holidays.
Happy holidays, everyone. Happy holidays, live video audience. If you are a part of the Ecamm fam, which I assume you are because you're hanging out with us here today, quick reminder that we'll cut out of the podcast later that the Ecamm holiday hangout is happening tomorrow on Discord. If you're like me and you're brand new and stupid about Discord, don't worry. We're going to be all stupid there together. It's going to be awesome. You need to go into Discord, ecamm.tv/Discord. And then you've got to click on the emoji. That's how you open the rooms and unlock the content. So first you got to click the check mark. You literally press the check mark emoji that's right below the content. That'll make sure that we know that you're cool with the rules, because we don't want any non-rule followers in our space. And then it'll say roles. And all that means is what kind of content do you like? Are you a podcaster? Are you a live streamer? So you click all of those emoji and they're really cute. So you're like, I'm a fish, and also this smiley face. And every time you click those, another room and area opens up filled with amazing people that can hang out with you. So it's a really fun space. I'm forcing Ken and Glenn to hang out there with us tomorrow. So between 12 and 2 p.m. Eastern, we'll be in Discord hanging out. Super low key. All your questions. If no questions, then we'll do some holiday cheers, and who knows? We have a musical crew. Maybe there'll be some singing. Anything's possible. Anything's possible in the Discord space.
You gotta find out.
Yeah. Anything's possible. Come find out with us tomorrow, 12 to 2. It's my last hurrah. I'll be eating all the rest of these chocolates one after another. I'm getting low. It was full earlier. I'm getting lower. So yeah, it'll be a good time. I'm looking forward to it.
All right. Well, that's it. Well,
that's it.
I would like to say thank you for everyone here. This has been an awesome experience, learning and everything, as being, from the editor to the producer of the podcast, of the Flow podcast. So I can't wait to keep it rolling for 2023. Super excited to see where we go from here.
Yeah, and that's a good reminder. We're off next week. So if you're here next week and you're feeling sad face, watch one of the replay episodes, listen to us, leave a review. And
they'll be able to see today's episode fully edited, so they'll still get that in there.
Perfect. Bye, everyone. We'll see you next week. We'll see you 2023.
2023. Bye.